All the values of the precious metals form a series that is simply a series of functions. This is naturally less easily comprehended, the less lively these functions are in reality. All the misgivings of the Middle Ages about the taking of interest arise from the fact that money then appeared to be, and actually was, much more solid and substantial, more starkly contrasted with other things, than in modern times when it appears and operates in a much more dynamic, variable and pliable way. The adoption of the Aristotelian doctrine that it is unnatural for money to engender money, the condemnation of interest as theft, because the capital repaid equals the borrowed capital, the argument in favor of this interpretation by Alexander of Hales, that money did not wear out by use and that it was not profitable, as were the objects of a lease, to the creditor, the doctrine of Aquinas that in the case of money, whose sole end is to be spent, use and spending were identical, and that therefore the use of money, unlike the use of a house, could not be sold separately. All these doctrines illustrate how inflexible and dissociated from the fluctuations of life money appeared, how little it was regarded as a productive power. The actual insignificance of money's effects concealed its functional character. This is the same basic sentiment concerning money as that which regards it as a metallic substance. This view, like that of the Middle Ages, opposes money as an entity per se to the circulation of economic objects, instead of bringing money into this circulation and recognizing that money, whatever represents it, does not have a function, but is a function. At the opposite pole from the mentality of the Middle Ages is the credit economy, in which the bill of exchange serves as money. The dominant idea in the Middle Ages was the substance of money, rather than its effects, which were in fact reduced to a minimum, though they could not really be eliminated altogether. In the modern conception of money based upon metal, the vital point is the working of the substance, and finally, in a credit economy, there is a tendency to eliminate substance entirely, and to regard the effects as the only important matter. This superficial view owes something to an earlier scheme of thought, which distinguished in all phenomena between substance and accident. Certainly, this was historically of tremendous importance. The analysis of every phenomenon into a substantial core and relative, changeable appearances and qualities was a first orientation, a first guiding thread through the mysterious formlessness of things, giving them a structure and subjecting them to a general category that was consonant with our intellect. The mere sense differences that appear at first thus become organized and determined in their mutual relations. But it is the nature of such forms, as of social organizations, to appear and to claim to be eternal. Just as the destruction of one social order in favor of another gives the impression that all order and regularity is being abandoned, so does reconstruction in the intellectual realm. The objective stability as well as the subjective understanding of the world seems to be destroyed when a category that formed the backbone of a worldview is abrogated. But money value will be just as little able to resist its reduction to functional value as light, heat and life can retain their particular substantial quality or resist their dissolution into forms of motion. Social interactions and their crystallization into separate structures. I shall now examine certain structural relationships of the economy. The extent to which it depends upon these relationships and not upon the substance of money, where money really functions as money, may be shown by a negative example based upon a general observation. We notice that, in a relationship between two people, the external form is rarely an adequate expression of its inner intensity. This inadequacy results from the fact that the inner relations develop continuously, while the external relations develop in a spasmodic fashion. Even if the two correspond at any given time, the latter persist in their traditional form whereas the former grow. At a certain point, there is a sudden development of the external relationship, and characteristically, this does not usually stop at the point corresponding to the inner relationship, but anticipates a more advanced intimacy. The use of the intimate form of address, do, with friends as the final expression of an affection that has existed for a long time is often felt at first to be exaggerated, and it produces suddenly an external closeness which is usually followed only slowly by a corresponding inner intimacy. Sometimes it does not follow at all. Some relationships break down because the form, although to a certain extent justified, overtakes the inner relation. A corresponding phenomenon can be found in the impersonal realm. Social forces which seek expression in certain constellations of law. Modes of exchange and conditions of government often fail because the traditional forms in these areas easily become rigid. If the desired external change nevertheless takes place, then it often goes beyond the state of readiness of the inner forces, and their subsequent legitimation does not always succeed. In some instances, the money economy has been introduced in this way. When the general economic conditions have been tending towards it for a long time, it takes shape as such a powerful phenomenon that the general conditions can no longer accommodate it, and if the growth of the inner economic forces does not catch up rapidly enough with the anticipated forms, the new institutions may come to a tragic end. Such was the situation when the Fuggers, and indeed all the great bankers of southern Germany, came to grief. Their financial operations, comparable with those of modern world bankers, took place in an age that had outgrown the barter economy of the Middle Ages, but did not yet dispose of the communications, guarantees, or commercial practices that are an indispensable correlate of such transactions. The general conditions were not such that debts could be collected in Spain or from ruling princes without further ado. The new forms of the money economy misled Anton Fugger into extending them far beyond what was justified by the actual conditions in Europe. For the same reasons, the debtors of these financial magnates were no better off. The financial crisis in Spain in the 16th century resulted from the fact that, although money was usually available in Spain, it was not available in the Netherlands where it was most needed. Consequently, difficulties, delays, and expenses arose which contributed to the ruin of Spanish finances. In other local conditions, money functioned in quite a different fashion. The Netherlands had the tremendous advantage in their war with Spain in that their money could be used just where it was available. In the hands of the Dutch, it was really money, because it could function unhampered, even though the Dutch actually owned much less money in a material form than did Spain, since their economic life was based upon credit. The function of money can be exercised with less money material, the more favorable are the local conditions, and one might say paradoxically that, the more it is really money in its essential significance, the less need there is for it to be money in a material sense. Alongside the influence of local conditions, it is the stability and reliability of social interaction or, as it were, the consistency of the economic domain that prepares the dissolution of money as a substance. This is illustrated by the fact that money brings about a continually increasing number of effects, while it remains itself immobile. The notion that the economic significance of money results simply from its value and the frequency of its circulation at any given time overlooks the powerful effects that money produces through the hope and fear, the desire and anxiety that are associated with it. It radiates these economically important sentiments, as heaven and hell also radiate them, but as pure ideas.